Program funding for the Organic Odyssey was provided by the California Certified Organic Farmers Foundation, as well as the Transition to Organic Partnership Program. Visit their web pages or social media for all their amazing content and guidance on everything organic. Support for the Organic Odyssey is provided in part by the Grimm Family Center for Organic Production and Research at Cal Poly. For more information or to support the center, please visit organic.calpoly.edu. That's organic.calpoly.edu for the Grimm Family Center for Organic Production and Research at Cal Poly. Support for the Organic Odyssey is provided in part by AgCom Central. Visit AgCom Central on twitch.tv or youtube.com for all content ag-related. That's AgCom Central on twitch.tv or youtube.com for AgCom Central.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Organic Odyssey. I am your host today, Emmy Marrow.
And I'm a co-host, Able Gill.
Today, we have some very special guests. To my left, I have Matt Grisham.
Yep, I'm the director of the Grimm Family Center for Organic Production and Research.
On Zoom, we have two very special guests, Eric Morgan and Elizabeth Whitlow.
Hello.
Hello.
Today, we'll be talking about regenerative and regenerative organic agriculture. We're going to talk about some of our personal experience in that area, as well as what it is, the definition of it, and then we will get into why producers and consumers should care about it, as well as the challenges and opportunities that come from it. So starting off, can you briefly describe your experience in the organic and regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, well, I've largely had experience in organics. I did do some animal integration work with a grower in Michigan, and I guess that was before regenerative was really mainstream, but that was probably pretty close to a regenerative system. But really, our two experts are really the experts. I'm really excited about today's podcast. Eric Morgan is really a leader in the field for annual crops, vegetables in particular, in the Central Coast and desert production regions. And Elizabeth Whitlow pretty much wrote the book on regenerative organic. She's shaking her head, but so it's great today. So I'd actually love to hear more from our special
Absolutely.
guests. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'll let Elizabeth go first.
Okay.
Well, all right. I guess I'll just say a quick plug of like who the Regenerative Organic Alliance is and how I continue to be credited with things like writing the book, which is not at all true. But we were founded by Patagonia, Dr. Bronner's, and the Rodeo Institute around 2017. And the reason those really visionary leaders in the organic space came together was because, number one, these are businesses that always question the assumptions of business as usual. They've been supporting organic for a long time. They believe deeply in organic, but they wanted organic to be more. They wanted to really see organic reach its true potential by incorporating regenerative thinking and regenerative theory. And so with that, they really looked at a new program that is looking at soil health, animal welfare, if there are livestock involved, and that's encouraged, and then a social fairness component. So thinking of how the farm workers and the farmers are being treated. And so that's really kind of the whole basis of the certification program that I was so lucky to oversee and do the pilot and kind of launch over the last 6 years. And I'm going to turn it to Eric because here is a really preeminent expert on what this looks like on the ground. Love it.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you for that, Elizabeth. But it all starts back in 1996, graduating there at Cal Poly with a fruit science degree. Figure I'm going to be a pest control advisor, which I was for a number of years. And one of my customers at that time when I was working for SoilServe really got into organics. And so really, the Braga family, with their, investment in the organic space that still goes on today, learned so much about organic production systems and really working on both the conventional side of pest control and the organic side of pest control throughout my tenure. Really started to see a bunch of roadblocks and hurdles in terms of where we're going with our traditional synthetic chemistries, needs of our retail partners and what they're looking for growers to do, what we're seeing from our regulatory bodies. And I've always kind of pushed back and like, we can't do it. What are we going to do? What are we going to find an option? And then basically got introduced to, regenerative agriculture. And I had an inkling that there could be something to how we till, having an influence on our soil, and so many anecdotes that go over so many years that I've heard, from the organic side. If you do this, then it'll help with this, and you do this. But I never was able to really duplicate, replicate, and get success on a large scale. And then a couple of years ago, even after we started farming regeneratively there at Braga Fresh, I got introduced to John Kemp, and he really put the pieces together for me from a scientific perspective to where it all started to make sense in really understanding, in my opinion, and Elizabeth will agree with me, I'm sure, that the only way that we can move our food production system forward with all the challenges that we're facing, water availability, discharge of water and the pollutants that it contains, where we're going with synthetic chemistries. And we even see in what RFK is talking about now in his public comments, that regenerative is going to be the path forward, and that we do need to really understand the relationship that exists in nature between plants and soils and start to leverage that in our agricultural production system to move us forward. Because when you start to focus on the soil, really that's going to check all the boxes we need for any growing operation, be it farmer or rancher, to move forward. I haven't seen anything else in my experience that will check all the boxes and provide for long-term sustainability.
100% agree with that.
Yes, that was very good. Can you compare and contrast organic, regenerative, and regenerative agriculture for us?
Well, Eric, do you want to start, because you really have done this firsthand? So I'd love to hear from you.
Okay, so it's a fine line I mean, ideally in an organic production system, soil is a focus. And in a real organic kind of mindset, the soil is focused on, and it should be regenerative in nature. But unfortunately, with so many of the concerns we have about food safety, and there's really a lack of biodiversity in many cases on a lot of organic farms. Unfortunately, as we're getting more data, a lot of us believe that it's a bit of a narrative in that biodiversity on the farm will actually make our food more safe. And so what regenerative is for me in terms of organic or not, I think that we need to focus on the soil. And I don't like really the conventional inputs and conventional mindset in regenerative being an option. But at the same time, I think that we kind of need to meet some growers where they're at and get them going the right direction. But for me, organic is the basis of anything regenerative. It has to be. Unfortunately, Elizabeth and I got to work with CDFA at the state level in providing, guidance for CDFA to define regenerative agriculture. And we mentioned organic, but we really didn't call it out as being something necessary. I'm optimistic that as we move forward and what we're seeing with the synthetics and what we're seeing, what RFK wants to do with the health and human services, that a lot of those toxic elements that are present in the synthetics, the neonicotinoids, the carbamates, the organophosphates, are likely going to be going away, and they're losing efficacy anyway. So again, that circles us back to organic. So for me, the distinction is, regenerative can include some conventional chemistries, but it needs to be mindful and in kind of a last resort and potentially a bridge to a more functioning soil. But, a regenerative organic system, if it's fully functioning, should be the ideal in the pinnacle of what we're trying to achieve. And so I was fortunate enough to see some work done by the Organic Trade Association, and they had, regenerative organic is the pinnacle, the top of that. They had organic below that, and they had regenerative below that, and they had conventional agriculture below that. So I'm kind of that mindset too. Especially since organic inputs on the fertility side, I'm a big fertilizer nerd. The true organic fertilizers are 1/3 carbon for the most part. And we see differences in soils when it's organically farmed because of, that mindset, that carbon focused mindset.
I think also like what you're touching on, Eric, is about this idea of the input substitution model. where organic is simply like, what's organically approved? What can I use to replace the conventional tools? And that what we really want to work towards is not looking at the input substitution model, but like what John Kemp talks about, feed the soil. That will feed the plant. And so when you build the healthy soil and you build more organic matter in the soil, you give the soil what it needs to deliver their nutrients to the plants, right? And so I feel like that's such an important part of it that has been missing a bit from the more kind of conventional or traditional organic approach. And I worked in organics for a long time, much of my career. I was an organic inspector. I worked at CCF. I saw many amazing regenerative plus organic farms before regenerative was a buzzword or before it was even called that. They were just organic farms. But I also saw a lot of organic farms that were meeting the law, using approved organic materials, but not upholding these best practices for building the health of the soil. And so I think, this renewed focus on the soil is key. It's the crux to this whole formula of like how we can make our agricultural systems function better, looking at just the inputs that you're using and looking at where those come from and what the effects are in the soil. And we know that when you apply Roundup, even though it's dissipates relatively quickly, and some people say, oh, it's fine to use a little bit of Roundup, that is not good for the soil microbiome. And so synthetic fertility is not good for the soil microbiome. And so if we're applying materials that are taking away from or destroying the soil microbiome, then we're damaging, it's like cannibalizing ourselves.
Yeah, and just to kind of add on, I'm in Yuma today, and I have a presentation tomorrow, and I have one of my slides right in the middle of my slide deck is we need to shift our focus from thinking about feeding the plant to start thinking about feeding the soil. And so that's what regenerative agriculture kind of comes down to, is a lot of other elements, but primarily as agronomists and growers and people that make fertility decisions, we need to start to focus on what is going to benefit the soil. And if we use that lens, then we're started down the regenerative pathway. Because if we take care of the soil is then going to take care of the plant, and then the plant takes care of the soil, and the soil takes a better job. It does a better job taking care of the plant. And it's just this iterative process that continues in growth and flourishes. And a lot of the problems that we have, that we're experiencing, that we don't have chemical controls for right now, will go away. Down here in Yuma, where I'm at today, fusarium is getting bad. Fusarium is getting really bad, and even the resistant varieties, if there's enough, pathogenic fusarium in the soil, they're still losing them. In the organic production systems, not nearly the issue. And I'm taking, into account that their fertilizers are 1/3 carbon generally, and that they likely have a better rotation plan because they have to, because they're audited, by an organic, auditing agency. And so crop rotation, getting carbon in the soil, that's almost enough, to start to see that there is a distinction there. But you can't keep growing lettuce after lettuce after lettuce and do extensive tillage, oxidizing your soil, accelerating the decomposition of organic matter in your soil. And what we do, if you start to focus on feeding the soil, is you start to create competition. And so there'll be other microbes in the soil that will compete with and even eat fusarium. And so competition needs to come back in, but unfortunately, so many of our Western soils are almost like substrates at this point. And owning a soil lab and seeing a lot of soil data, the health of vegetable soils is bad. You start to take a look at permanent crops, especially grapes, where they have a real big push for sustainability, and they look a lot better. So, I think that you can move pretty quickly on permanent crops, and vegetables where it's so intensively tilled. It takes a while and it's difficult, but you focusing on the health of that soil and changing our mindset to be soil focused is what's needed.
So I think one thing to add there also is like, let's talk about those central tenets of regenerative practices, no matter where you are, because first of all, regenerative is always going to be a holistic systems approach to appropriate farming in context to that site-specific location. So where Eric is right now is way different than where I am in Northern California, and what the soils need here, and what the farmers are facing with these soils compared to what they're facing down there in Yuma. But some of the core principles of regenerative that are proving themselves is doing a crop rotation, really proactive crop rotation, keeping the soil covered, so kind of a protective armor over the soil, leaving living roots in the ground whenever possible, bringing in diversity and bringing in animals, I think, and then minimizing your tillage. Is there any that I missed there, y'all, or is that?
I think, yeah, you hit the big ones.
Yeah, I mean, you can add the social and animal welfare components. Those sometimes I think come in, but you hit you hit it. What I find really interesting. So, I'm a ag and soil geek and bug geek. I don't know as much about fertilizers as Eric. But one of the things I do in my spare time is I have a collection of the USDA yearbooks of agriculture. So this was a publication that the USDA used to put out. It stopped sometime in the 80s or 90s, I think. And there are these 1,000-page sort of just treatises on some aspect of U.S. agriculture. And one of them is from 1938, and I think it's called The Man and Soil, or Soil and Man, or something like that. But Dr. William Albrecht, who is really a pioneer soil scientist in the USDA, has a essay in there that just talks about organic matter, conserving it. And if you read it, it reads like those principles of regenerative ag. And, if you read the early Rodale material and the early stuff from like Sir Albert Howard or Lady Balfour, it's there too. And I mean, for me, it was in the organic sphere. The first time I heard someone describe regenerative, I was just sort of like scratching my head and saying, well, yeah, crop rotation, reducing tillage, adding carbon to the soil, keeping it covered. That sounds really familiar. But the funny thing is that over time, after 2002 and the National Organic Program and codification of the organics, we did see some dither and drift, I'd say, from those core principles. And so to me, that's the real exciting thing about regenerative organic in particular, since it's built on organic certification, is trying to just recapture and reclaim those core principles and really get them going in the larger organic space. So to me, it's always like when I was, working with organic and conventional growers, I always looked at organic was kind of the spear point, right? I mean, that's where, okay, this is where we're really going to innovate and do things that work in nature better. And anything we do here, we can put into a conventional system. And regenerative organic now almost seems like, oh, no, this is actually the spear point. And so I was really interested to hear you talk about that regenerative organic, regenerative / sustainable, and then, conventional sort of ladder that you described from the OTA, because that seems pretty accurate.
And I know what you're reminding me of too. Sorry, Eric, just real quick, like as an inspector for a long time, what we really focused on was in the federal law in 2002 was the section 205, 203 on soil fertility and crop nutrient management practices. And the first 2 points in there talk about you must select and implement tillage and cultivation practices that improve the soil.
Right.
You must manage crop nutrients and soil fertility through rotations and cover crops. But what we focused on instead was all about, are you applying manure? Is it raw manure? Did you make it into compost? Do you have the temperature logs?
Right.
It was what we could actually verify as inspectors, and we didn't ask like, well, where are your tillage records and how deep are you tilling and what's good? Like all those things that we're now asking in the regenerative space that is part of the law, but wasn't being implemented consistently.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, it's easy to keep a record of an input, right? But actually measuring practice, and then on top of that, if you actually want to measure outcome, it gets way more complex.
Yeah, I had a question. You guys have been talking about healthy soil a lot, and I was just wondering, what does that mean? Like, what constitutes like unhealthy soil or healthy soil?
Oh, that's a complicated. I'll give my best probably answer. I'm going to say a healthy soil is likely going to be fungal dominant. meaning that there's more fungi in the soil that interact with the plant. That's a good way to look at it. A soil that's respiring quite a bit of CO2 is a good way to do it. But I think more than anything else, what somebody can know if they have a healthy soil or not is what is the condition of the crop that they're growing. Is it subject? Does it have aphid? If you have aphid, you don't have a healthy soil. Um, if you're losing crops to fungal diseases in the soil, you don't have a healthy soil. But we're coming up with all sorts of different metrics to look at it. Total organic carbon, Slake's test. The Soil Health Institute has 4 metrics that they've published that they're using to be guidance. But I think if you're looking at the outcome, and it's always kind of nice to start with an outcome and then work backwards. Are you able to grow a crop successfully and not have it die from insects and disease, and do it in a sustainable manner, in financially sustainable manner too. Growers are getting destroyed with on-farm economics right now with this input-driven model that everything has a significant cost. Growers in the Salinas area, they may spend 1,000 acres, $1,000 for fall tillage, and somewhere between $300 to $700, between turns, between crops. Those are big dollar amounts that we're putting into tillage. And if we start to actually look at it, there's another way to do it that may be to be less expensive. But I think, getting a sustainably yielding crop without all the issues that we have will indicate you have a healthy soil. But it gets very technical, what metrics you're going to use. And some people, it's such a new space that even the academics argue about it. So
there's
yeah.
no good definition. And the other piece of it, and Elizabeth, I think it was really great to hear you bring this up about the appropriate context, right? In terms of where you are on the planet, and what is the natural ecosystem that has been subverted into an agricultural process, right? Because what's a healthy soil in Kansas, where it's a tall grass prairie? I mean, that would be the natural sort of climax community. A hardwood mixed forest in Michigan or Pennsylvania, and then the sort of chaparral areas of the Central Coast. It's going to look different. It has to, because those systems just function in a radically different way in their natural state. So, I think that context is so important, and that makes it hard to define.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think the other thing that really goes against us is what Eric, when we all first met a couple years ago at Eco Farm, and it was like the topic was, can you grow leafy greens regeneratively? And like Eric was so brave, he was willing to say, this is a scorched earth policy that we are undertaking here, where there's no living thing that is supposed to exist here, so that we can keep it safe and we can meet the food safety demands of the retailers. And for me, that's one of the most problematic things of our modern agricultural systems. And what I've learned so much around bringing animals back to the farm, what it does for the soil, for the health of the soil and the health of the farm, with bringing in that diversity and something, not just their urine and manure, but also this exchange that happens between the saliva of these ruminants and the grass they're grazing, and what happens when it goes down and locks into the soil microbiome. And so I think that's some of the most exciting developments, but it's also the most prohibitive and most difficult for any vegetable farmer to embrace or to get behind, is to bring animals onto the farm.
But it kind of went from a taboo subject at that point when we were discussing it to, well, now Western Growers is leading the conversation with a coalition of, food safety and sustainability, where we're actually talking about this meeting today at 12 o'clock. I missed it, here at a conference, but we're talking about it and we're looking at the data, and even had a chance to have a conversation with the leafy greens food safety expert at Walmart that covers this entire segment. And I said, what will Walmart base their food safety, biodiversity decisions on? Are they going to base it on, an underwriter's concern or a legal opinion, a risk? And she said, no, we're going to base it on science. We're going to base it on studies. We're not going to base it on fear. We're actually going to look at the science and make our informed decisions by that. And that was so refreshing because
Yeah,
Walmart, they're such leaders in this. If they take that approach,
yeah,
with their growers and with their shippers and do take a science-based approach to this. I mean, they're already calling themselves a regenerative company.
right.
Let them create that, that standard,
Sure.
and that will, we know everybody down here in Yuma, we can't use compost, we can't use compost. It's a big issue. Wendy's apparently even has a prohibition where they won't buy lettuce on ground that's had compost applied to it. And
Wow.
so we just have a number of obstacles
Oh,
to kind of get past and
Yeah,
take a science-based approach to it. So
yeah, yeah. That's exciting to hear. And now it's like, who's going to fund the science? So that's the other problem.
yeah.
there is that. There is that.
So I was at that meeting today, Eric, and it was really exciting. I think we're en route to developing some good materials to get those conversations going. So we can talk about that afterwards. But
Yeah, going back to some of the definitions of regenerative agriculture, I know that there's many different ways that somebody could define it. As you know, a farmer may define it as working with nature to restore ecosystems, but a scientist may talk about the terms of the carbon and the biodiversity enhancement. But is there any intention, or is there a lack of a standard global definition, or is there just a lot of multiple common definitions within regenerative agriculture?
There's a lot of definitions.
Yeah, this is Elizabeth's wheelhouse, so I'll let her go first.
Yeah, no, there's a lot out there. There's many new certifications, and everyone has their own idea of what it is. The Regenerative Organic Alliance, we define it through these three pillars or this lens of the soil health, the social equity piece, and then the animal welfare. And there are other programs that are strictly looking at soil health. And so it's definitely jury's still out. There's no one definition with the CDFA effort, which Eric and I were both a part of. Um, there was some really good language that was in that definition. I feel like some of it got a little bit, a little lost in the end, but there were some pretty good gains on that as far as like what it was addressing. Looking at soil health and soil organic matter, we kept that one in there. Remember, Eric? That was a fight.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Lake Alexander was
yeah,
adamant about
yeah,
that. So
good.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, what do you think, Eric? There's seems to me like there's a lot of
yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky, and having worked with different certifiers, in what I was doing previously to try to find the thing that fits, the best. Um, yeah, it's tricky, but I think the way that I'm kind of trying to define it is what is going to be the model that provides long-term, positive outcomes for the grower, the community, all the stakeholders involved. And so to me, it's essentially adopting a new lens for each production system in each region and not being afraid to be experimental, and with the goal to be to improve soil health. And so it's going to have a lot of different looks, I think. And so that's, and initially as certifications got, it was like, you can't till. And
Right.
now we're hearing reports that, Rick Clark is likely going, one of the OG regen guys is going to be, probably plowing. And it's like shocking.
Right.
And it's like, but it's been 8 or 10 years or whatever, and
yeah,
applying no fertilizer. But now they have a problem with perennial weeds. They're
yeah,
doing a good job with annual weeds, but the perennial weeds are getting by. And so, what can we do? There's always going to be, circumstances that come up that we need to change. But he's been doing this a long time with no tillage at all. And now all of a sudden the perennial weeds are getting to be a problem.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it's probably going to set back soil health a little bit, but it's
mhm,
it's an iterative process to move us forward, and as new challenges come up, we're going to have to find solutions. So it's kind of a moving target in my mind, but again, the outcome is you know long-term sustainability of the farm, be it big or be it small, in the context of all the challenges that growers are being presented with, and all the needs that retailers have, all the needs that consumers have, and actually trying to make food healthier.
Mm.
RFK has been talking about that a lot. It'll make America healthy again. Regenerative produce, regenerative crops have the potential, when done right, to have a higher level of nutrient density. And that is starting. Technical, but essentially, plants have to do a lot of metabolic work to synthesize the chemicals that we apply to them in terms of fertilizer. They don't have to do nearly as much work if they can pick up amino acids from the soil, which is what they're trying to convert stuff into in the plant. And so there's these metabolic gains that occur when you start to work with nature that inherently makes the plant more healthy. Amino acid levels and profiles will change. Even in genetically modified crops, you don't have all the amino acids that a non-GMO crop has. They're missing. And you actually can't get plant health indicators high enough on the GMO crop because they bred it out. So there's a lot of challenges that we got to go through in kind of meeting each kind of circumstance, market, grower where they're at is imperative. But for their long-term economic viability and the benefit of our community, this is what we need to do.
I'm glad you brought that up about the nutrients in the food compared to conventional farming, so to say, because my next question was going to be, why should producers and consumers consider regenerative organic agriculture compared to regular standard? Because I know that we talked about how there's a reduced input cost and increasing resilience to climate change for producers. But can you explain a little bit as to why consumers should even think about regenerative at all?
My first response is thinking back to the last, episode here a couple of years ago when we were talking about how little people even know about organics at this point.
Absolutely.
I mean, that was the last conversation I had. And so what do I think consumers need to know? I think that, and Elizabeth has worked on this to some degree, working with retailers, but there needs to be a messaging. And what, I think that the messaging needs to be careful because if we market this as a solution to climate change and we lose sight of the fact that organic is avoiding, the synthetic pesticides that have toxicological negatively effects on both people and the environment, we might be losing sight of something. And so I think that a lot of the marketing is geared towards, a solution to climate change, which it is. And I think that with the acute climate issues that we're seeing, I think that a lot of consumers are going to get very interested and want to adopt that. But I'm really concerned about what happens with the organic market segment in terms of this and the work that's been done by these innovators and there's these heroes that have built, everything that Elizabeth and I've worked with are on their backs, right? We get to know some of these guys that got going the entire thing in the 70s, right? And in trying to get, the negative, get these nasty chemicals out of our food supply. And so for the consumer, yeah, they need to be made aware, but we need to reemphasize the benefit of organics in that too. So I don't want, it will be marketed as a solution for climate change. It is something the consumer can do to invest in a local food system, everything else, move things ahead, but we can't lose sight of organics at the same time and the value that provides.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, the USDA organic and the international organic movements are all really important. They're the brightest spot in the food sector and have been for 20 something years, always growing because consumers are reaching for organic more and more and always and have been for as long as I've been involved in this industry. So I think organic is obviously a really reputable and important hard-earned designation for farmers and has been led by a lot of courageous farmers taking chances and farming at that front edge. The thing about farming is you're farming at the front edge, and under climate change, you're constantly dealing with some new challenge. There's nobody in this room who is not touched by climate change. None of us. And so that means farmers, even more so, are farming at the front edge of that. And climate change is making it a lot harder to farm. There's floods, there's droughts, there's extreme heat waves, there's all kinds of stuff getting thrown at them. But what we've learned with regenerative and especially regenerative organic is that you are able to the system becomes more resilient. And you build in with the small water cycle and how having more green plants and more trees, agroforestry, for example, and hedgerows, you encourage more moisture in the system and you retain more moisture in the soil. So there's so many ways that the regenerative systems are fostering healthier communities, building healthier soil, and also absolutely proving to grow more nutritious, more nutrient-dense food. You can look up the Bionutrient Food Association, and you can look up Audacious. Those are two groups that are looking at this, and what they've learned in the last couple of years of testing is the best indicator of the nutrient density in the food is going to be the health of the soil.
Dr. Grisham, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, again, I mean, it's funny, but that Albrecht chapter I was reading this morning basically says exactly what you just said from 1938.
I love it.
And that philosophically, I really just have to wonder. I mean, I think, the strength and weakness of of USDA certified organic to me is that there's a codified system. So it's a strength, certainly from a marketing perspective and from an integrity perspective. But the weakness that comes with it is that I think there's a tendency for people to begin to believe there's one true way. Mm-hmm. And again, back to your comment, Elizabeth, context matters. I mean, depending on where you're growing, the true way to do it and do it best is going to be very specific. And if you're sort of the way you approach the system is rigid, you're going to have a problem. And that's something that, I mean, I've been thinking about that throughout my career working in organics, especially when the food safety stuff that Eric was bringing up really came up in, 06, 07. And these general principles, it's weird. I mean, the more older literature I read, I see these same general principles being talked about. And, and it's just a matter of figuring out how to apply them in the specific reality. But we want to kind of always do the same thing, right? I mean, across land. And I think that's been the impetus of conventional ag has been one of homogeneity, right? Where I'm going to grow corn wherever I want to grow corn. Doesn't matter whether it's a place that is suitable really to naturally support that plant. But
right.
So I'm getting all philosophical.
No, but I get it because it's like I had lunch today, and the guy I had lunch with, his grandfather was down here in the Yuma, growing, cotton in the 40s and 50s, kind of synthetics. And I think that we've lost the generation by just a little bit that used to do it this way. Maybe, maybe they've been gone 20 or 30 years, now, but kind of that pre-World War II grower generation. And the guy I had lunch with, it was a great conversation, and he talked about riding around with his grandfather when he was a kid, and in the grandfather telling him, we take care of the soil and we don't worry so much about the plant. And it's like,
right.
and you're talking about Albrecht this morning from reading Albrecht this morning from 1938. We got a cotton farmer from 1940.
Right.
We just need to maybe go back and read some older stuff about how we used to do it a little bit. And maybe, I think about it, and it's like, we got to keep moving forward, and we get really focused on yield. But what we haven't looked at is cost in a financial terms, but also social cost, environmental cost, all of these different things, they have a cost too. And we've just been given tools upon tools upon tools, but I've seen it in my career where the tools stop working. Mm-hmm. And right now we have, for the second time in my career, we can't kill diamondback moth again, in a conventional system. And what pest control advisors are going back to doing is using things that don't kill beneficial insects. So the beneficial insects will kill the diamondback. And that's what commercial, conventional pest control advisors are now looking at is, real tenets of IPM, to control an insect pest. Yeah. So it's coming full circle. And I think that, my generation starting to look at it, but the generation, a little bit younger than me, they're really paying attention and have that inquisitiveness to why, a lot of it's like, I've got young daughters, and is that why? And so I think a lot of us need to ask why a lot
Yeah.
more. And do not accept the answer because we've always done it that way. You can't keep doing it. So
Yeah, that why is essential. And yeah, I love that you're bringing up Albrecht, and I just think about like what's old is new, and
Yeah.
really indigenous is like as old, like the indigenous people here kept the land in balance for thousands of years. We've screwed it up in like 80, 75, 80 years. Look what we've done to the water and to the soil and to the health of the planet and its people. So yeah, I mean, it shows you very much like we were already on the right track. And yeah, maybe it's a little, we have to bring in modern approach, modern technology, of course. But I think there's a nice marriage that you can find of the two.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm at. It's okay. So we have these principles that really have been handed down for generations that have, thousands of years of evidence that they work. And then we have all these new approaches to where we can understand how they work better, which means we should be able to apply them better. But if we ignore the basic principles, then we're back where we started. And yeah.
As we come to a close today, can you guys share one final thought on what you think the future for organic and agriculture, regenerative agriculture is? Like, where do you think this is headed? If you could, give it in one thought, so to say.
Where it's headed, gosh.
yeah, so there's only one exit, and it's through the regenerative door. There's not another mindset that will be successful. And it does incorporate ag tech. It does leverage new technology. It does leverage experimentation. It's the only way forward. And I've been looking for a way forward for a long time, right? Understand in dealing with sustainability and the challenges that are created, through the standard production process, even the challenges in the organic system, it's not a perfect system as we know it. And to me, it's the only thing, that will work long term and be viable.
And that's the beautiful part, that it works long term. And there's a place here for everybody, whether you're a farmer, whether you're a consumer or an eater, or a brand who's trying to make a really cool product. There's a place for you to help support this movement and help everyone get on this pathway of something that would create long-lasting positive change. And that's proven. We know that it's true. And so like, why would we keep throwing our, banging our head against the wall, trying other solutions when this one is proven to be true? And so I just think there's a place for everyone here, and to get young people in the college, school, the next generation of farmers and eaters and entrepreneurs thinking about this is key. So I'm really grateful to you all for having us on the podcast, and to the work that you're embarking on in your careers.
And I do have a little call to action
Absolutely.
for the generation that's coming up, and the college students and the people that are trying to figure this out. Don't go to work for an NGO with your college education. Do not directly go work for a farm and understand the difficulties and challenges that these folks are, saddled with, the economics. Understand where growers are at. If you go directly, to somebody that's going to try to have a top-down approach to regulate a grower, you will not be successful. If you can understand a production system and the challenges and opportunities that are there, then you can start to facilitate change. But I think that, growers, we're a tricky bunch. It's a tricky bunch to get through to. But if you can understand the mindset, understand the process, understand the risk that they take every day, the financial risk, it's a big gamble, then I think that you can be effective. But if you want to get an environmental science degree and go to work for an NGO and help lobby for some change, I would highly recommend working for a grower first to get experience, to understand every aspect of what goes into growing food. It's imperative in my mind. And I think that that's the way that we're going to be effective.
Wow. Thank you all so much for joining us today. It was very good. I learned so much. I'm not sure about you.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you so much for joining us to talk about regenerative and organic farming. Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Dr. Grisham, as always. We will see you next week on the Organic Odyssey.
Program funding for the Organic Odyssey was provided by the California Certified Organic Farmers Foundation, as well as the Transition to Organic Partnership Program. The show was created by Matt Grisham, the talent coordinator and resident organic expert, as well as Moses Mike, the faculty production lead. The Organic Odyssey is a production of the AGC 225 class called Digital Communications in Agriculture. The student team that produced the show included Natalie Eubanks and Savannah Taylor, the directors, hosts Madison Jasso and Ava Rose, storyboard editing by Avery Mulerath, and the technical team, Isabella Anderson, Vincent Biller, Vivian Kempora, Kendall Cook, Callie Granis, Carolyn Janes, Zach Collar, Emmy Lynn Marrow, Jack Oliver Roa, Sarah Purcell, Mason Riley, and Holly Rudnick. The guests on this episode included Eric Morgan, Elizabeth Whitlow, and Emmy Marrow. The Organic Odyssey is a digital media collaboration between the Agricultural Education and Communications Department and the Grimm Family Center for Organic Production and Research at Cal Poly. These credits were read by Chelsea Ann. Thanks for listening.